You, of course, recently made a lot of headlines with Brett Kavanaugh. What's your takeaway? What's our lesson from that?
Well, I think in an earlier era, he would have garnered 95 votes, or maybe 97 or 100. But we're in a different era now. One thing that I felt near the end of that process is that we didn't have full due process. We could have done more. We Republicans should have called for an FBI investigation earlier. And that's why I felt that we ought to hit the pause button and do what we can to make sure that, one, people in this institution felt better about it. I got to that committee that morning and just saw the food fight, between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats threatening to walk out of the vote, and I thought, this isn't good. This isn't good for this institution. It's certainly not good for the court to have somebody, if he's either going to be rejected or put on the court with a cloud. And so I felt that what I did was the right thing. It wasn't popular at the time, I can tell you that.
Well, Sean Hannity, you probably heard this, but he said, quote, "Of course, Republicans predictably caved and flaked in a big way and just bought the Democrats more time to seek, search, destroy, bludgeon, getting a delay under the guise of an FBI investigation."
Right. That's what a lot of my colleagues thought at the time. And that's what I heard, believe me, back in the anteroom. But I teamed up with Chris Coons. I wanted at least some Democrats to say, we'll feel better about the process. We may not change our votes, but we'll feel better about the process if we have a delay. And in the end, the delay proved to be a good thing, in my view. The FBI conducted an investigation. Some wished it would have been more broad. I wish we would have started it earlier, and it had been more broad. But it was thorough, and I think it helped the country and certainly the court.
Have you since talked to Justice Kavanaugh?
I've not. He did send me a voicemail that frankly, I've looked at what's happened since he's been confirmed, and to see our party kind of spiking the ball in the end zone, it just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. This is an impartial referee that we're putting on the court. I thought he gave a magnanimous and appropriate speech at the White House. But the fact that there's even an event to celebrate, with only Republicans there and no Democrats, I just didn't think that was right. And so I haven't said much about it.
What's your relationship been like with the Senate leadership, Mitch McConnell and others?
Sometimes good, sometimes strained, because, for example, last week when I called for a delay, that was not well received by the leadership. It was not. And there have been other times as well when I've, in the Senate, you can do that. You have leverage, whether it's on a vote on tariffs or something else. You can use your leverage, as you should. That's what senators do. They say that, it's tough to question your colleagues' motives if you know their wife's name or their kid's name, if you know something about them. And I've found that certainly to be the case, that the more you know about your colleagues, the more you can trust them. And that's what has been missing here for a long time, is trust. Trust that people won't take the process and use it to their ends and shut others out. Trust that you can get to a solution eventually if you can work together. And that's what led Chris Coons and me last week to do what we did. Chris and I have traveled together a lot, particularly in Africa, where we both spent part of our youth. And I know Chris and trust him, and he says the same. And so I think we need more of that. I don't know how many of us can maroon ourselves on deserted islands, but we ought to spend more time with each other and trust each other a little more.
Well, let me take that one step further. How did you and Senator Coons develop that relationship?
We both serve on the Foreign Relations Committee. He chaired the Africa Subcommittee before I got to the Senate for a couple of years, and the first 2 years I was here. And then when Republicans took control, I chaired it. And so we've traveled to Africa a number of times together, once with President Obama, several times on our own. And we've sponsored legislation together on wildlife preservation, Zadara, economic sanctions to try to push Zimbabwe in the right direction. So we've worked together on these things, as well as some others on the Judiciary Committee. And so I knew him well enough that when he gave his speech, I knew that that was intended for me. And he acknowledges that, and it did move me, that we could work together, that what they were requesting, a 1-week delay, limited in time and scope, would be acceptable. And so that's what encouraged me to get up and ask him to go to the anteroom.
And then what?
Well, we talked, and soon attracted a little attention when my side of the aisle realized that something was afoot and that I might not be a yes vote. So a lot of my colleagues came forward and said a lot what Sean Hannity did, that this will just lead to more allegations coming forward. This will be an endless loop that we can't get through. We can't do this. And they had every reason why we shouldn't. But I felt strongly that we could. And Chris backed that up, and Chris kept up his side of the bargain. He went out and said good things about it, saying that we would all feel better if we had this investigation. So I went and voted to move it along the process, but only if we had an FBI investigation. And Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski called and said that they would back me up, and that was all it took. The leadership had to deal with us.
When you saw Leader McConnell, what did he tell you?
Well, his effort was still to try to keep it, to our time frame, where we could vote the next day. Can we do a very quick FBI investigation? And we said, no, it has to be, up to a week. It doesn't need to be more than a week. But I can say the leadership was not happy. They weren't, but they knew that that was the only way they might be able to get our vote. And so we presented it, and they had to accept it.
Do you think, looking back, that Senator Feinstein should have at least had a conversation with Chairman Chuck Grassley about the letter early on?
I do. I'm not one that believes that she's the one that leaked it. I've dealt with her for a long time, and I think that she did her best to protect Dr. Ford. But somebody leaked it at some point, and that was really not fair to Dr. Ford. But I do think that it would have been better had they sat down early on and said, here's a serious allegation, let's treat it in a way that really honors the institution and honors those who are involved.